Bakil controls vast territory in the north and is widely considered the country's largest tribe. For decades, President Saleh has been building strong ties with the tribes to consolidate his grip on power. Now that Hashid and Bakil seem to be abandoning him, the president may find himself almost alone and isolated in the face of a movement gathering pace and determined to oust him. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
Well, a cabinet reshuffle by the King of Bahrain has done little to satisfy thousands of anti-government protesters there. They gathered at the Pearl roundabout in the capital Manama, where protesters were killed earlier this month. Traffic was brought to a standstill as they marched along a major road. Police did not intervene. Ireland's main opposition party is all set to form the next government. The Prime Minister in waiting, Enda Kenny, has been kissing babies and insisting that economic stability is his first priority. But he says he'll try to renegotiate the $113 billion bailout, which stopped Ireland from going bankrupt. Angry voters blamed the ruling Fianna Fáil party for the economic debacle. It's now facing its worst defeat in nearly 80 years. Well, the arrest of a war crime suspect in Bosnia has provoked protests in neighbouring Croatia. Thousands of people packed the main square in Zagreb, demanding the government protect war veterans. They're furious at last month's arrest of Tihomir Purda. He denies charges of war crimes during the Balkans War in the 1990s. In New Zealand, the mayor of Christchurch says at least a third of all buildings must be demolished and rebuilt after Tuesday's earthquake. Officials also say serious questions need to be asked about why some of them collapsed. 145 people died in the quake. More than 200 are still missing. Survivors have been attending Sunday services at church. Our correspondent Andrew Thomas joined one congregation.
The cracks caused by the earthquake in the structure of this church are almost imperceptible, but they are there. And significantly, the church tower has moved a little distance away from the main body of it, which makes the whole structure unsound, certainly not safe enough to hold a church service inside, which is why this service is taking place al fresco in the grounds of the church. The vicar was telling me before it began that he's made sure the congregation is a safe distance back, just in case an after tremor comes and does bring the church down. In Christchurch city centre, of course, most of the churches lie in ruins, most famously the cathedral, where it's believed between 20 and 25 people lost their lives when the spire of that church collapsed into rubble. Very important, though, this Sunday that the community can still gather, can still share experiences, get together and relive and explain what's happened this week and try and find some kind of sense through that. This very much part of the healing process for this city, the opportunity to gather and to share.
This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making the headlines. The United Nations Security Council has unanimously voted for sanctions against Muammar al-Gaddafi and his inner circle. They include travel bans, an assets freeze and an arms embargo. The US ambassador to the UN says the sanctions send a strong message.
When atrocities are committed against innocents, the international community must speak with one voice. And today, it has.
Libya's deputy ambassador to the UN thanked the Security Council for supporting the resolution. He described Gaddafi's government as fascist.
The Tripoli regime has no longer any credibility. It goes without saying that this resolution represents moral support for our people who are resisting.
Meanwhile, protesters have taken control of most of eastern Libya and are now closing in on the capital, Tripoli. Witnesses there say Gaddafi loyalists have been carrying out his orders to kill opponents. Well, in other news, Ireland's main opposition party is all set to form the next government. The Prime Minister in waiting, Enda Kenny, says he'll try to renegotiate the $113 billion bailout, which stopped Ireland from going bankrupt. The arrest of a war crime suspect in Bosnia is provoking protests in neighbouring Croatia. Thousands of people packed the main square in Zagreb, demanding the government protect war veterans. They're furious at last month's arrest of Tihomir Purda, who denies charges of war crimes during the Balkans War in the 1990s. In Peru, a bus has plunged more than 180 meters into a ravine, killing at least 22 people on board. Another 39 were injured east of the capital, Lima. The driver is among the dead. It's thought he lost control as he was trying to pass a slower-moving truck. The cabinet reshuffle by the King of Bahrain has done little to satisfy thousands of anti-government protesters. They're congregating at Pearl Roundabout in the capital, where protesters were killed earlier this month. Also in Bahrain, a prominent leader from the Shia opposition has arrived from exile. Hassan Mushayma was being tried for allegedly plotting a coup in his absence. Bahrain's foreign minister says he's now being granted a royal pardon. Well, those are the headlines. We'll be back at the top of the hour.
Hello, I'm Hazem Seeker. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week, Libya. From international pariah to partner and back again, we look at that country's role in the global economy as oil prices continue to rise. We're at the London School of Economics, where Gaddafi's son once studied and submitted a 400-page report on civil society and human rights. And as the unrest spreads, governments struggle to get their people out. We look at Turkey's relationship with Libya. Well, the world has been doing business with Libya for years, but now as Gaddafi's regime allegedly bombs its own people, was the West right to pour billions of dollars into the oil-rich country? The price of oil is steadily rising as the unrest there continues, hitting stock markets and consumer spending hard. In a speech to Kuwait's parliament, UK Prime Minister David Cameron said countries like Britain were wrong to support oppressive regimes for the sake of stability.
For decades, some have argued that stability required highly controlling regimes and that reform and openness would put stability at risk. So the argument went, countries like Britain faced a choice between our interests and our values. And to be honest, we should acknowledge that sometimes we have made such calculations in the past. But I say that is a false choice. As recent events have confirmed, denying people their basic rights does not preserve stability. In fact, it does the reverse.
In 2008, Italy agreed to pay $5 billion to its former colony Libya in reparations, and that opened the door to numerous deals. And now Berlusconi's attempts to befriend Gaddafi and his regime could be backfiring. And as Banu Batnaga reports, Italy isn't the only country caught up with investments in Libya.
What does the Juventus Football Club, Italy's biggest bank and the country's biggest oil company have in common? All have a Libyan connection. After the oil-rich country renounced weapons of mass destruction in 2003, it's been the darling of the West, managing to secure multi-billion-dollar deals, make investments right around the world, even secure the early release of the convicted Lockerbie bomber. Now, from Washington to London to Rome, it all seems a bit premature, and Libya's former colonial overlord Italy stands to lose the most. The Libyan Foreign Investment Fund owns 7.5% of Juventus, one of the world's most successful football teams. Libya is the largest shareholder in Italy's biggest bank, UniCredit. The Libyan central bank governor is also UniCredit's vice president. Then there's the Italian oil company Eni, which has been drilling in Libya since 1959, longer than Gaddafi has been in power. Italy relies on Libya for a quarter of its crude oil. And 2% of Italy's biggest defense and security firm, Finmeccanica, is also owned by Libya. Italy's Silvio Berlusconi and Muammar Gaddafi signed a 2008 friendship treaty in which their two countries promised billions of dollars in mutual investments and a promise from Gaddafi to curb illegal immigration. Since then, Libyan and Italian interests have become more entrenched, and now at a time of uncertainty in Libya, concern is mounting in many boardrooms. But Italy isn't alone. Gaddafi's overtures with the outside world stretch far beyond the Mediterranean. Take a look at this list of all the known companies and the countries where they're based with significant oil deals in Libya. They all stand much to lose as the situation there deteriorates.
I assure you that American oil companies and British as well as Italian are involved in Libya, and they signed contracts in the last 2 years.
Relations with the UK improved back in 2004. As then Prime Minister Tony Blair shook hands with Gaddafi, Anglo-Dutch oil giant Shell signed a multi-million-dollar gas exploration deal off the Libyan coast. Fast forward a few years and British defence companies were allowed to sell projectile launchers and crowd control ammunition to Libya. Now though, facing scrutiny over the possibility British weapons could be used against the Libyan people, the government has cancelled at least 8 arms export licenses. And while the US has been critical of Britain cozying up to Gaddafi's regime, Washington has allowed firms to quietly conduct business as usual. In 2007, US firm Occidental signed a deal to spend $5 billion over 5 years developing oil production.
The ex-Prime Minister of Britain, Mr. Blair, visited Gaddafi 3 or 4 years ago, and they reached an understanding, after which we heard that the Libyan who was imprisoned in Scotland has been released. Of course, the Americans didn't like that, and consequently, they thought that the release of the Libyan prisoner was due to an understanding about granting British companies some more concessions, oil concessions in Libya. That's why the focus of attention was on Britain. But remember that the Americans are up to their neck in their involvement in Libya.
Libya's wealth and Gaddafi's family have become irreversibly entangled in the global economy. What happens in that country and to the regime will have reverberations right across the world. Banu Bhatnagar for Counting the Cost.
Well, joining me now from Rome is Maurizio Caprara, diplomatic correspondent for the Italian daily Corriere della Sera. Maurizio, thanks for being with us. Have the chickens come home to roost here for Italy? Is it paying the price for years of getting friendly with a regime that many people say is now showing its true colors?
Obviously, relationships are a problem now with Libya in this moment, and Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi signed in 2008 in Benghazi a friendship treaty with Muammar al-Gaddafi that joined efforts, Italian efforts and Libyan efforts for developing a lot of activities. And the decision was that Italy has to give $5 billion in 20 years